The Kansas Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired was founded in 1920. The Kansas Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired is celebrating its 100th anniversary. We have captured the life stories of some of our members, talking about the barriers they have had to face in terms both of discrimination and in employment situations.
I'm Nancy Johnson, currently from Topeka, currently a retired rehabilitation teacher, and I just do a lot of little things now. But when I got out of high school, I was able to type 90 words a minute from dictaphone dictation. And so I had some ability in that area, and because I was known to several of the nuns who were at the hospital in Salina and had known them for years, I was lucky enough to be asked to do some transcription for them in the evenings and while I was in college. So I did. Actually, it was before I went to college. I had a year at home after high school. And so I went in and would do typing for them in the evenings and get them caught up. The lady who did it would get behind, and I'd go in and work for a month or two and get all their records caught up for them. And then they'd lay me off until she got behind again, and I'd go in and catch her up again. And so I did this for probably 3 years during the first 2 years that I was in college. And the job came available full time, and I thought, gee, I'll apply for this. I've been doing the job for 3 years, so I ought to have a chance. Well, I didn't get hired. And so the nun who was the department head told me, she said, you know, there are places you can work someday, but that's not here and that's not now. And so I suddenly became unavailable. At that point I said, you know, I've done the job for 3 years. I've proved that I can do it. And if all I'm going to get to do is part-time, I'm done. And so I just wasn't available anymore. So during my last years of college, I was busy enough. I didn't try to find a job. I went from Salina, Marymount College, where I got my first 2 years, and then to Wichita State, where I graduated in 1964. I was married at the time. I worked as a vendor for a little while in the Wichita area, generally for my husband, who was a vendor. And then I was able to get a job in special education at the Winfield State Hospital. So I worked there for about a year, and then my son came along and we had to move back to Wichita. And I didn't have anything going at the time, so I applied for a job as a typist with the state, what was then SRS, and I typed dictation from social workers doing their records. Did that for a couple of years until my daughter was born. And at that point, the cost of daycare equaled pretty much what I was already earning, so I didn't try to find another job right away. I figured being a stay-at-home mom with 2 kids was a pretty good job, even though it didn't pay any money, and we did need the money. And so I went out and I sold Tupperware, and I did Amway products. The barrier there was that I had no transportation, and there was no way I could deliver the products that I sold. I was a good salesman, but I couldn't deliver the products. So I was sitting around the house one night feeling sorry for myself. And I thought, I always wanted a master's degree. I always wanted to get that final degree. And I had come through VR at a time when they had been able to pay for master's degree training. And they had decided that that was not going to be possible anymore. And so even though I had all the undergraduate work done, I was not able to work as a speech therapist as I had wanted to and had trained to. And so again, I was kind of at a loss because I didn't know what I was going to do. I went back and got my teaching certificate and was qualified to be a speech therapist in the schools, except that, again, because I didn't have the master's degree, I couldn't continue. Tried a little bit of private practice and couldn't really raise the clientele because, again, the lack of credentials kept me from it. But I did get hired as a special ed person at Winfield State Hospital. And I spent a couple of years there with, actually, it was a program to see if we could incorporate some of the disabled people into less restrictive situations. And I had 23 students ranging in age from about 3 years old to, I think the oldest one was in their 60s, mid-60s. So I had every age group you could think about, had a little office at in the basement of one of the buildings there at the hospital. Did that until my son was due, and the staff at the hospital decided that they were concerned that one of the clients would have a breakdown or whatever and cause damage and would injure the child. So they said I needed to quit. And I did. The next thing I did after that was I became a typist again. And this time I was typing records for social workers at SRS. Did that until my daughter was due and the supervisor had to go on vacation and didn't want me to continue while she was gone because she was afraid she'd get left without one typist and wouldn't be there to replace me. And so she said, why don't you just go ahead and quit? So I didn't have that job anymore. And that's about when I took on, I said, well, I'll just work as a stay-at-home mom. And that's when I moved on to the rehab teacher position. So eventually, and we were living in Wichita at the time, a gentleman with whom I was a friend was the rehab teacher there. He said to me one day, we've got an opening for a rehab teacher in Salina. Well, my husband and I both had parents in Salina. And so I thought, what the heck, I'll apply for that job, which I did. The interview that I took a bus from Topeka to Wichita, got there right at noon, and my interviewer met me at the bus station, took me to lunch, and then back to her office, and interviewed me for 2 hours. Probably the longest interview, I know it was the longest interview I've ever had. And the questions just came and came and came. How do you do this? And what do you do for that? And all kinds of stuff. And I'm thinking, is this never going to stop? I shouldn't have to sit here for hours on end. Finally, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she said, I need to go talk to my boss. She offered me a cup of coffee and took off down the hall. I sat there for 15 or 20 minutes thinking, what's going on? She came back and offered me the job. So I called my husband, told him I had the job, And then I had to ride the bus back to Topeka. Or to Wichita, excuse me. I don't even know where I live anymore. So I came back to Topeka, and within a month, we had moved from Topeka, Wichita, back to Salina. And I began the job in 1981 in November, and I worked at that job until 2010, the end of 2009, beginning of 2010. I loved the job. I had all kinds of new people to meet, and still had the 2 kids to get raised. And it made all the difference in the world from our perspective. At least we could survive, pay our bills, just barely, but we could pay them. I met a lot of really special people. I didn't have to sit in an office at a desk all day. I taught people to do the things that I learned from childhood on in terms of just daily living independently, cooking, housekeeping, doing the laundry, whatever it took, changing diapers, all of that kind of stuff that as a mom you have to do, as a person you have to do. In the process of doing that job, I also spent some time at the Rehabilitation Center for the Blind, and I taught, I had a classroom there. I taught orientation and mobility. I wasn't nearly as good as Michael is, but I could get the basics taught to people. And then they put me in charge of mostly the techniques of daily living, so I had to teach cooking and housekeeping and, the same old stuff I'd been doing, but each day was different with a different person. I did that job for 29 years. I served Central Kansas out of the Salina area, and then I was in the Topeka area. The first 10 years was on the road, and the last 10 years was on the road. And in the middle were the years that I spent at the rehab center. I was also part of the older blind program where we worked with people 55 and older, and we put together some traveling programs where we would go for 3 days, and we had people from the center. We had a team from the center, and we would travel out with all our supplies. We'd find a location and bring in local people. And that worked pretty well. Did that for a while, and then back to the rehab center in the regular program. I did that job for 29 years. Just loved every bit of it, for the most part. There's always a kink somewhere that comes along, but for the most part, I really did. I loved the job. I retired at the time that all the services pretty much were shut down because of the budget cuts. So 2010, at the end of 2009, was the end for me. And I went into retirement not ready to do that and not knowing exactly what I was going to do with myself. And honestly, it was a shock. I mean, I just didn't have any kind of plan. I always needed to have a goal or a direction that I was traveling, and all of a sudden I had none. Now, as I'm retired, I do work as a volunteer, and I do as much as I can in terms of the rehab teacher job. I still enjoy doing that. Usually, right now, I have one student that I've taught the complete Braille code to, and 3 that I'm working with right now. So I'm still teaching Braille, and when I get the opportunity, I will share other techniques and other things with folks as I come across those who need them. I'll go anywhere I can go if I can find a way to get there. But transportation is a major issue. When I was working and being paid for it. I had a driver who took me wherever I needed to go and worked with me 3 days a week. 2 days a week I spent in the office. I used Braille on the road to take any notes that I needed, and then I could bring that back to the office for the other 2 days and do the reports that I needed to do. In the beginning, I simply used the Braille, and I had to dictate all my reports, and I hate to dictate, but I had to do that, so I did. And then I was able to get a little Braille note taker, and it was a little bitty thing that you could attach. I could attach it to the computer, and it would help. I could basically download what I'd done, or get it somehow so I could use the printed, and then I could take that and attach to a printer and actually print my reports, which was a step up from having to dictate them. And then eventually I got a better note taker, but I still had to use the computer and get the material printed and into the files. So I did. The technology did improve as the years went by. And I don't claim to be any kind of a technology expert, but I can do what I need to do.
Yep.
So that's kind of been my lifetime, and I hope that other people have benefited from some of it, and that I can continue to share what I know with people.
Yay.
Learn more about KABVI at kabvi.com.